How did a country that exported golf carts in 1999 end up terrifying Tesla and Volkswagen just 25 years later? Most people think they just copied. But the real story involves a $230 billion gamble and a predator China purposefully invited into their own tank. In this video, we decode the mechanical and financial reality behind China's rise to the world's largest car exporter. We go beyond the copycat narrative to analyze how 20 years of vertical supply chain control and a $230 billion state gamble effectively leapfrogged a century of Western automotive dominance. In 2024, China didn't just become the world's largest EV producer. It became the world's largest car exporter, period. But here's what most people forget. 25 years ago, China didn't matter in the global auto industry at all. In 2000, China's presence in the global car market was so small that, to put it bluntly, Detroit, Germany, and Japan barely noticed it existed. Let's put real numbers on this. Global export share. China accounted for just 0.3% of global automotive exports, and that included parts, not just finished cars. Production volume. China produced roughly 2 million vehicles in 2000. The world produced about 58 million that year. That gave China a global production share of roughly 3.5%. Domestic versus global reality. China wasn't exporting. It was assembling cars for its own market, mostly through foreign joint ventures like Volkswagen, SAIC, GM, Shanghai. Brands like BYD, Geely, or Chery were either tiny or barely known. No global brands, no export power, no technological leadership, which makes the obvious question unavoidable. How does a country go from exporting golf carts to exporting millions of EVs that undercut Tesla, Volkswagen, and Toyota? China's decision to invest heavily in electric vehicles wasn't a single moment, but a strategic shift that unfolded in 3 key stages over the last 2 decades. While research began in the 1990s, the all-in moment happened around 2009. In 2001, China officially recognized the potential of EVs by including them in its 10th five-year plan as a priority science and research project. This was led by the 863 Project, a high-tech development program. At this stage, the focus was purely on laboratory research rather than mass production. A major catalyst was the appointment of Wang Gong as the Minister of Science and Technology in 2007. Wang was a former Audi engineer in Germany and a massive proponent of electric power. Under his influence, EVs were elevated to a strategic priority for the nation. China realized it could never beat the West at traditional internal combustion engines, which had a 100-year head start, so it decided to leapfrog the technology and go straight to electric. The official launch of the industry-wide investment happened in 2009. The government introduced the 10 Cities, 1,000 Vehicles program, which provided massive subsidies for public transport, buses and taxis, in major cities to use electric power. Also in 2009, China began offering direct consumer subsidies, often covering up to 60,000 yuan, roughly $8,000 of the purchase price. Massive state-funded investment began for a national charging network. China's decision was driven by 3 main factors. 1. Energy security, to reduce its heavy reliance on imported oil. 2. Pollution, to combat the severe air quality issues in its megacities. 3. Industrial ambition, to dominate a new global industry before the US, Europe, or Japan could. By the time the West was still debating whether EVs were practical, China had already chosen a technological direction, mobilized state research, and aligned environmental goals with industrial ambition. So when Beijing formally pushed EVs in the late 2000s, it wasn't experimental. It was the execution phase of a plan that had been quietly forming for nearly a decade. There's one uncomfortable question we need to address, because this is where most people stop listening and start arguing. Yes, China copied. In the early 2000s and 2010s, Chinese automakers aggressively learned from foreign partners. Joint ventures weren't just about production. They were about technology transfer, including vehicle platforms, battery chemistry, and manufacturing processes. And sometimes that learning crossed legal and ethical lines. There were lawsuits, there were IP disputes, and in some cases, those accusations were justified. But here's the part most people miss. Copying was never the endgame. It was the starting line. China used foreign designs to train engineers, build suppliers, and master mass manufacturing. Then something changed. Around the mid-2010s, Chinese EV companies stopped copying and started optimizing. Software became internal. Battery management systems became proprietary. Cost efficiency began beating Western rivals. Copying built the ladder, but China didn't stay on the first rung. And once China had the know-how, the subsidies came in, over $230 billion in 15 years. But by 2019, the Chinese EV industry was getting lazy. They were subsidy hunters making mediocre cars. So Beijing did something radical. They invited a predator into the tank. Beijing used Tesla like a catfish in a pond of sluggish local car makers to scare them into innovating. Tesla's presence forced local parts suppliers to meet world-class standards. In a sense, Tesla didn't just sell cars in China, it trained China's EV industry. Local suppliers learned precision manufacturing, software-hardware integration, yield optimization, and cost discipline. Tesla's strictly applied its 95% local sourcing rule. Once a Chinese factory learned to make a world-class part for Tesla, they began selling an even better version to local brands like Xiaomi and BYD. Chinese engineers watched Tesla up close, not copied but understood. Within 3 to 4 years, Chinese EVs matched Tesla in tech, beat Tesla on price, and matched Tesla on software UX in China. Tesla didn't lose in China, it accelerated China. China has made tremendous success and is dominant in the EV world. However, it is not invincible. Challenges ahead: trade barriers and tariffs, political pushback in the US, EU, and Canada, and overcapacity as well as brutal price wars at home. But the core advantage remains: supply chain control, cost leadership, and manufacturing speed. China didn't win EVs because it cheated. China won because it picked the right technology early, accepted short-term waste, scaled faster than anyone else, and treated EVs as infrastructure, not just products. The rest of the world didn't lose overnight. They just realized too late that this was never just about cars. Can the West ever catch up, or has the corner overtaking already ended the race? Let me know in the comments.